All right, cool. We'll go ahead and get started. We're gonna do song and dance performance. These guys didn't know that that's what they were being recruited for. Now, we're gonna, for the closing session today, we're gonna do a couple of things. We're gonna get a quick summary of the usability testing that happened during the week leading up to today that was part of the camp. One of the things that's really awesome about the Twin Cities camp is that we've been able to help organize usability testing for Drupal. This is the third time, actually. We did it in 2008, and again in 2011, and then this year in 2015, with help from the University of Minnesota. And it's an awesome thing that our community has been able to help improve Drupal in that way. We hope that we can continue to do so. So we'll get a quick summary of some of the things that we're learning. Then we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion. The theme is the future of Drupal. I've got a couple of questions for these guys, but we're also hoping that you guys have questions that we can try and answer as well. And then we've got a couple of housekeeping things at the end, so you kind of wrap things up there. So stick around until the end, and that's it. We'll be done. But Boyan is going to give us a quick summary of I don't know, what they learned about how awesome Drupal 8 is.
All right. Well, thank you for coming. So I think some of you might have already seen the results that we just presented just before this. But to give you kind of a short overview of what we did, we actually went into kind of usability lab this past week. And we spent time, about 1 hour and a half, with 7 users going over Drupal and trying out all kinds of things with the Drupal interface to figure out whether they could just kind of carry out the basic tasks that we expect we should be able to do with Drupal. And we learned a whole lot. The sessions that we did back in 2011, we learned a lot about the problems that we have, and we did a lot of work in tackling that. And going back here again this year was a lot of fun, because we saw a lot of things that we were like, it now actually works. People can actually carry it out. We learned, for example, with mobile that people were actually doing just fine with that. Our mobile interface worked. It was quite exciting. People were able to just get and start creating content with it. And people felt that it kind of worked like it's supposed to work.
Even if they hated Drupal, they loved our mobile.
Other than that, we saw that the kind of content creation experience, something we've been really focusing on with Drupal 8 to improve, was a lot better. A lot of things worked just kind of out of the box and worked kind of like how people expected it to work. To be a WYSIWYG, to be able to just add in an image and not have any trouble with that. So we saw a lot of good improvements in that area. Obviously, we also ran into some problems and some kind of major problems, I guess. So I think we ran into, for example, a terminology problem, something I think everyone in this room is probably also familiar with if you're trying to explain it to your colleagues or friends about how it works. So we ran into a lot of problems that people just didn't know what the kind of label is that we use for that concept, even though they know it from other systems. And then the other big thing that we saw, which was surprising to us, is placing a block in Drupal 8. That's kind of changed. I've kind of this sidebar that you pull your things out of to add things to your page. And people just completely miss that sidebar. And that's the only way to do it, at least the only reasonable way to do it quickly. So by missing that, they were unable to place a block, basically. And that's kind of a critical Drupal thing. So we found that they missed that simply because they thought the sidebar is this kind of supplementary thing. They know from visiting other websites that that's not really the area where you see critical information is, or critical functionality, and it is in Drupal space. So that's another one of those problems that we found. So that's really a critical thing, and that we should be solving. And that's actually already, I think, in the issue queue. We're going to have to solve it before release. So if you're interested in getting involved with that part, we have a tag, UMan 2015, space in between, that you can just search on, and then you can just find kind of all of the things that we've done around this and all of the issues that we identified. Some of them are just minor things, things we can solve really quickly, and other things are kind of bigger things that we will take a while to solve.
So what tag?
UMN.
Oh, I thought you said human.
Oh, no. we did test the humans.
I was like, wow, that's really introspective. That's That's UMN space 2015.
Yep,
Right,
that's
and,
correct.
and that's a tag on the issue.
In these, yeah.
Yep. We should tweet out a link. I'm going to search for that.
I think one of the things that's really cool about the fact that we've been able to do these usability studies here a couple of times now is that, like Boyan was mentioning, is like the first times that we did this, people discovered like, oh, our block system isn't as intuitive as it could be, and placing blocks is hard. And so a lot of work went into fixing it. And then we tested again, and we discovered, apparently the changes we make weren't the changes we needed to make. And so now we get to go and try again and try to fix that interface. But then in a couple of years, we'll need to test those interfaces and make sure that the changes that we're making are improving Drupal. And the ability to do that is made possible by the contributions from our local community, which is awesome. Like the sponsors that help put on this camp, and everybody who bought a ticket to attend this camp. And to me, that's kind of cool because I feel like everyone in this room can say you've now helped contribute to making Drupal more user-friendly, which is pretty badass. Yeah. So I wanted to have a bit of a discussion or kind of a panel about the future of Drupal and kind of what can we expect to see down the road. What are we going to be talking about at Drupal Camp next year? I'm going to ask a question to start things off, but I'd love if you guys had some questions too that we could have them try to answer for us. But my question is, what are current developments in the way that we build the web? What are the new technologies or new techniques in the way that we build the web that are evolving now that Drupal needs to be prepared for in order to remain relevant in the future? And like, what do you see that we should be looking at now and being prepared for in the future?
I had a great talk with Todd
Wait, you
Ross.
should say who you are.
Sorry, I'm Andy Byron. I go by WebCheck. I am a core committer and I work at Mafia Trees. And I had a great talk with Todd Ross yesterday, who was the keynote speaker from yesterday morning from Core Kitchens. And I think a big change that we're seeing in the web in general is the rise of the front-end developer. So there was a time when everybody was a front-end developer because you just wrote HTML by hand and there were little .html pages and that was how you did websites until about 2004, 2005. And then it was sort of the age of the CMS, and this is when the back-end developers had control over everything. And if you were a front-end developer, you were kind of like forced to deal with the crap that was given to you from whatever dynamic system. And now we're seeing a move back, where front-end developers are sort of taking control, and they're like, no, I'm not going to deal with the crappy markup of the CMS generates. I am going to build it myself, and I'm going to use the CMS as basically a dumb thing to spit out content that I can then put in exactly this right way that I want it. And I think Drupal 8 is going to be fine because we have web services and core and stuff, but I think going forward, we should really embrace that model more and make it so that the front end, the admin, and the content store in Drupal are swappable. And that people can use all of it in Drupal, half of it in Drupal, only one part in Drupal, however they want to do it, because I think the way the web is going, the idea that one system does all of those three pieces for you is sort of fading and going away.
I'd like to build on that, actually. One of the things that I see a lot of people talking about, I'm sorry, Larry Garfield, Krell, Web Services Initiative Lead. I work at Palantir.net since senior architect. Anyway, one of the things I'm seeing people talking about more and more is decoupled CMSs, which is not the same thing as Angular running your application. That is one possible way of doing it. The other way is just you have one microservice, essentially, that is your data store and your business rules and your content, and it does not have a concept of presentation. Presentation is a completely separate program, potentially on another server. Maybe in a browser, maybe it's still PHP running somewhere, whatever, and they're talking to each other. In order to do that, that backend has to be really, really fast to make it scalable, which means I think in a couple of years, we need to be making sure Drupal will run in a non-shared nothing PHP environment. I think that's coming. And I'm going to be talking about this a lot more in Barcelona, because I've got a core conversation on exactly this topic. But teaser, we're going to have to start thinking about, at the code level, things like thread safety, things like re-entering code things like shared state, and how do we program differently to survive that transition, because that's what we're going to have to do to build that kind of 3 different pieces systems that you can mix and match. And that's something where we've actually made substantial progress towards being able to do that, but we have a lot further to go yet, and that's the kind of stuff we can start doing immediately to set ourselves up for that code-wise. Most of it comes down to listen to all the people who are preaching about code quality and statelessness and high-quality code. A lot of it sounds really academic and silly and pointless when you're dealing with a shared nothing architecture. As soon as you have to deal with thread safety, that is the cost of entry, is that level of code quality. So start preparing for that now.
So I'm Kathy Faze. I'm ESDT. I contribute to Drupal 8 as part of my job at Blackmesh. Angie, when you were saying like one of the things that we have to be prepared for is the rise of the front-end developer wanting control, what control do they need that they're not going to get with the Twig templates?
Right. So.
So Drupal 8 has a new templating system, which is called Twig.
It's new to Drupal.
Right, new in Drupal, but it's going to come with Drupal. And you can use it to specify the markup that you want. And they're in separate files that, that people can edit, like front-end developers. And they don't have to edit PHP code. They just edit these Twig templates, and they can specify their markup. So when you said we need to be prepared for that, like what?
Yeah, what I mean by that is Twig is awesome if you want to customize the output of Drupal to look better, and it's dramatically more improved than PHP templates. PHP templates, if you were a kick-ass like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript person, you had to also learn PHP, which is this weird thing that's kind of from the 90s. It's like, why would I need to know that? And it was really, really difficult. Twig, you still need someone on your team who knows PHP, how to get this stuff into the template for you, but at that level, you're just manipulating markup and CSS and JavaScript, kind of like what you know. And then there's little funny brackety things that pull in within it and stuff. So that is fine if you're using Drupal as your presentation. And what a lot of people are doing these days is they're completely throwing that up, and they are just using Drupal as a content store. Because on the front end, they want a mobile application, or they want a kiosk in the mall, or they want a whatever it is. They'll build that in React. They'll build that in Silverlight, whatever. They'll build the front end in some completely different language.
And we're not ready for that?
We're totally ready for that from a web services angle, but we still have like pound markup in our render APIs, for example, which assumes that what is coming out of the page is going to be markup. So it's always possible to work around this stuff. Like, you just don't touch those properties and you're fine. But the idea being that we need to sort of change, we've done a huge amount of work to change the assumptions in Drupal 8 that what's going out of the CMS isn't going to be an HTML page. We just need to take that all the way there. Okay. And we need to acknowledge that throwing out all the markup that Drupal gives you is a valid site building approach.
Does that make sense? Like Twig is awesome, and our support for Twig is awesome if Twig is what you want to use.
Right.
But if you want to use something different, in order to remain broaden the use cases and the scope of people that are using the system, you need to get into a scenario where anyone can choose to build Drupal sites kind of in whatever way they want to. And especially with how fast things move in front-end development, especially right now, where it's like there's a JavaScript framework like every other week. And
there's a new one.
Yeah, there's a new one. Every time somebody rings a bell, there's a new JavaScript framework. And that's probably not going to change for a while. So making sure that we construct systems that allow people that are working on front-end applications to work with the tools that they want to, I think is important. Mark?
Just quick thought on what front-enders would like.
Wait, you should introduce yourself.
I'm Mark Drummond. I'm a front-end developer. Blah, blah, blah. So Twig is fantastic in that we can have a ton of control over the markup, like that Drupal will have. But we're still stuck in the Drupal mentality of what those templates are, what they're wrapping around. It's not going to necessarily be an easy thing for me to say, I'd like to have one template for my search component that appears on the page, or I'm going to have to go into 5 or 6 or 7 different templates. And I can find those with Twig Debug and I can customize them. But it'd be really cool if I could just have one template and then I could pass in the variables I need for that template and then put the markup around it, one around it.
Yes.
And that might be possible down in the future, but you know, that's something I'd love to see happen down there.
Yeah, so I'm Boyan Sobers. I'm a user experience designer from the Netherlands, and I'm a UX maintainer of Drupal 7 and 8. I think actually during, I guess, the Scotch initiative at the time, we actually played around with that idea of having like a component language, not so much like all these blocks that actually contain loads of different things, but actually trying to separate it out as much as possible. It didn't go as far as we wanted, but I actually hope that with Drupal 8 that we'll be able to bring that in some form or way.
I'm Steve Hirsch, engineer at Palantir, or Plenary.
He's about to troll me.
I'm going to ask a leading question, and the way I ask it will give you a sense of my opinion. Can we find ways to get more specific than front-end people and back-end people when we are talking about more specific concepts? So routing is a concept that in and of itself is not a back-end concept or a front-end concept. A lot of modern front-end tools have taken the concept of routing, taken it from the server, and put it into client-side JavaScript. Okay, but routing is still routing. And I'm concerned that when we talk about front-end people and back-end people, we segregate and potentially split the people who understand routing and say, sorry, you can't talk about routing anymore because you're a back-end person and routing is now a front-end thing. Are there ways in the Drupal community that we can break down those front-end and back-end walls if what we're talking about is rendering templates, which is not in and of itself a front-end thing or a back-end thing?
I think it's weird to ask that question after what we were just talking about, where we were saying that we needed to have even more separation between the front end and the back end.
Well, and what I'm saying is, it's fine to say our components need to be separated and decoupled. I think it's dangerous if that means we separate our people and don't let them talk to each other.
I think a lot of that is historical, in that we had PHP developers who worked on the server, and we had people who wrote template files in CSS because they knew HTML and CSS, and there was an assumption that one was too complicated for the other, either direction. And people who knew what they're talking about in JavaScript kind of fell in the middle and never adopted by either side, because JavaScript is a full-on programming language, and you have to think of it as a fully capable Turing-complete programming language with all the same, if not more, complexity than PHP. But there's still some legacy of, JavaScript is the toy language for the mere front-end developer that is just not true. But I think there's still some legacy of that thought. I think what we need, I think agree with you. We need to have a much clearer segregation of our technology components and figure out how to make those discrete enough that you don't have back-end, front-end, you have like 4 or 5 layers, and a given person can be on whichever set of layers they are comfortable with. And those layers, there's a clear delineation between them, but the people can span across them as far as they feel like.
So I guess a way of framing up a specific concern is if we have people who understand rendering templates. Rendering templates is something that you can move from the server side to the client side, and a person shouldn't be excluded from that conversation simply because rendering of the template is moved from the server.
Well, let me put the question back to you. How would you describe, like if you're writing the documentation page for rendering templates, how would, like in what way, as someone who considers themselves an all-around developer, how would you prefer us to refer?
I
will say I'm shorthanding a lot of stuff because
Sure.
I am really tired and just waiting for this.
I would prefer we talk about, say, rendering rather than
Talking
front
about
end,
tasks.
because
rather
front
than-
end, I think, as a term,
Yeah.
Okay.
doesn't tell us.
So it seems like one of the things that we need to be cognizant of as a community, and as we're going through these motions of making a tool that's a little bit more decoupled, is not siloing people into. Just because you're a front-end developer, you have to stay focused over here. You can't help out with these particular things, and be aware of the fact that all of us are Drupal developers first, and then maybe have some specialization in certain.
All of us are web developers.
Web developers, yeah. So, do you have questions?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. It's kind of a follow-on to that.
Wait, say who you are.
I'm Andrea, and Zen Doodles and Little Lands. I'm also an engineer here on that. But my question is, what is the next Drupal, the next generation of Drupal development? Like, it's maybe it's not front end and back end, but what is that skill set? What makes a Drupal developer? What are those skills? Obviously, Symfony is a thing, and where do we divide that? Those lines? If it's not-
You should answer this one because you probably have tried to develop Drupal, like as a Drupal 8 developer, more than any of us because you had to write the book. So say who you are.
My name is Jennifer Hodgson. I've been involved in Drupal mostly in the, well, my largest contribution to Drupal has been in documentation, but I've also been involved in quite a lot of aspects of Drupal 8 development, and I maintain a couple core systems as well. And I also am the author of a O'Reilly book on Drupal programming, which I'm working on the Drupal 8 edition for. So I think that's why Kathy wanted me to address this question. So I'm not sure about all this next generation stuff. But so are you wondering about skill sets? I mean, for Drupal, for someone who's been a Drupal 7 developer, if they want to get involved in Drupal 8, definitely they need to learn about objects and classes and traits and interfaces and namespaces and all that object-oriented stuff that's part of PHP. I'm less involved in the JavaScript stuff. I don't do JavaScript that much, but I'm sure there's some JavaScript skills that are useful. And it seems like our JavaScript stuff is more class-oriented than it used to be also, but I don't know if that's true. So is that, I'm not sure exactly
So
where your
what would
question is
it?
aimed.
So if that's what the if that's what a
If you
Drupal
cannot
7
do
person would
everything
be.
in Drupal 8, 99%, no, not 99%, but anyway, 90% probably, if you are developing, say, custom or contributed modules for Drupal 8, a lot of the stuff that you did in Drupal 7 with functions is going to be in classes. And if you don't know about classes and inheritance and interfaces, you need to learn that before you can really get into Drupal 8.
And what if you already know that because you worked on a different project that wasn't Drupal? What do you need to know to come into Drupal 8?
Okay, so if you already know object-oriented PHP and you want to do PHP development in the Drupal context, you're going to need to know about plugins, services, plugins and services. I was trying to list something else, but really plugins and services are the two big things.
Yeah.
And forms.
Oh yeah, and the form and render API, that's the third thing.
I have
yeah.
a sort of question, kind of along the same lines, but a little bit more looking towards the future of Drupal. And if these are the skill sets that you need to learn to use Drupal now, what are the skill sets that the Drupal community needs to develop now, so that if we remain good at creating web things in the future?
Well, I do have a comment on that one, because I actually, way back when, I actually have some formal training in computer science, which I think many people that do web development don't have. And I don't have that much because I was actually a physics major. But anyway, I took a couple of classes. But I think that with few exceptions in the Drupal community, there aren't people that are all of that skilled in the computer sciencey stuff. Like, they haven't read the Gang of Four book, which is all about how to really do object orientation with the factory patterns and all of that kind of, the pattern, what's that book called? What? Design patterns, yeah. And so I think that's kind of lacking in the Drupal community, and the fact that we adopted these outside frameworks like Symfony and stuff has brought some of those things in, but people weren't necessarily comfortable with the concepts of factory classes and things like that. And so I think that would be something that, as a community, it would be helpful for us to it's not that hard to read the Gang of Four book or, to learn about design patterns and stuff. But, do you even know what the Gang of Four book is? I mean, any computer science person that's taken a class knows about that. So
It's like the
that's just
hardest
something.
book ever to read.
It's just
Yeah, I
very
was gonna say, that's not an easy book. That's an
Okay,
easy book to read.
there,
if you're trying
there
to
are
practice.
there are other books, but I mean, just to know about those kinds of things that I think that we don't bring the standard computer science knowledge, and PHP hasn't been a bit really, conducive to that either. In
Well, it's
fact, we're
interesting
saddled with
that
it, like,
you say that because like a big move in the Drupal AP. It was funny. One of the quotes that came from one of the participants in the usability study was, and it was more about Drupal's weird terminology like node and page, that it's not a page but a tiny little bit of a thing, and then like what's a block, what's a content type, and all this kind of stuff. But the comment that they had was, man, if you learn Drupal, you're setting yourself up to not be able to learn anything else, because we do things so weird compared to everything else. And so I think that is the biggest thing that is lacking is if you grew up on Drupal, you're lacking that broader perspective that literally everyone coming from .NET, Java, C, any of these other languages this would be innate to them. They're like, of course you would use a factory pattern for this.
Or other modern PHP frameworks.
Or
too.
other modern PHP frameworks, exactly. So I think there's a lot that Drupal developers have kind of been in this silo, in this island, if you will, to use latest technology. And it's a lovely, happy island, and we have those cool lanterns and stuff. But but in the meantime, everyone else develops skyscrapers and stuff, and we're like, oh wow, okay, and we just have to figure out how that stuff works. And it's not rocket science. Like kids coming out of computer science and even coming out of high school and stuff know a lot of this stuff. But it's a matter of shifting your mental model over to these new terms and words, and that's going to be a little intimidating at first. But then once you know them, the great thing is that there's so many resources, because this is literally how everything else works. And I think we've done a great job maybe moving our code in that direction. And what I'd love to see us do in the future of Drupal, like Drupal 9, is evolve our terminology and our user interface in that direction as well.
But that's
So Drupal's just a lot less-
a different direction shift, though, because we don't want our users to have to know about design patterns and factory classes.
No.
Right, but we have to figure out what the standard way of thinking about websites
That's
is.
what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, that was one of the things from the usability presentation that you guys did that I didn't get to bring up because I forgot about it and it just came back into my head. But this question of having to learn a certain amount to even be able to build a Drupal site. But to my mind, part of the reason is because you're building a complex site, and you need to learn how to structure, that we were talking about the data model. You have to have some way to think about that data model, and you are going to have to learn that. And it's not something that anybody that's built a couple pages of website can figure out necessarily, or that they should just be able to do, not having any idea about information architecture, for instance.
Right.
So I don't know that, I think that there is a learning curve for Drupal, and you are going to need to have some skills in data modeling or information architecture and stuff like that. Otherwise, you shouldn't be using Drupal, right? In a way. I mean, you can use it to build a simple site, and maybe we want to orient towards that. But the reason, to my mind, the reason for using Drupal is because I need the complexity of Drupal, and there is some learning involved in that. So I'm not saying that we need as much as we have, and the terminology is crazy, but at the same time, it's not going to be just something where you just do it, spend an hour and you've got the complex site that you need.
Who here saw Dries's keynote from DrupalCon Bogota?
Oh, I do.
You did? A few people. Watch the video of it. It's some parts I disagree with. There's one part he's talking about in particular that I think is very, very relevant to this topic. Andrea, you were asking about, what are the skills we're going to need tomorrow as a Drupal developer. And one of the observations he made is that most technology tools start off being very casual hacker friendly. You buy a couple of things, hack them together with a hammer, and you can do whatever that is. Photography, telephony.
Volkswagens. Back in the 60s, right? Anybody could fix a bug.
Websites, programming, take your pick. They all start out there. And they all start out, if you're not the hacker who knows how to mess with them, you can't really use them.
The Volkswagen fits that quite well.
And as they get more and more usable by the non-technical people, for whatever that industry is, the higher the barrier to entry to be able to work on them in the first place. Easy is hard. Easy is complex.
You get a car that's reliable, you have to take it to the mechanic to get it fixed.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, to get the fuel mileage, fuel efficiency you get out of modern cars, you can't be some jock with a wrench and work on that car, because the machinery involved in getting that level of performance out of it means it's 2/3 computer. You need an advanced CS degree to be able to work on the car. Cameras, same thing. Phones, same thing. Websites, same thing. And you know, Drupal has gone through that period of, just like the web in general, of anyone with a text editor can open it up and start hacking and be productive. And just like every other technology, we're going to outgrow that phase. And what we need to do there to not lose our culture in a sense is focus not on how do we make this, and this could be Drupal programming, it could be Drupal site building, it could be websites in general. How do we make this approachable for someone who doesn't know anything and doesn't want to learn to just do something? 2, how do we make this really easy to use, and how do we make it easy to learn how to extend? Drupal 9, Drupal 10, you're not going to be able to pick up just by opening a text editor, glancing at code, having never looked at it before. That era, not just for Drupal, but for any complex system at Drupal's level, is temporary. We're going to have more people who need to have some level of CS understanding. They don't need to be PhDs, but some level of CS understanding to be able to
grasp the code,
grasp the concept, simply because the level of complexity needed to make it easy for the other 95% of the world, it goes up. And it's unfortunate, but I think Dries is right in that trend. So Drupal developers are going to have to be more professional than historically has been the barrier to entry. And it's our job to make sure it's easier for people to get up that ramp fast, rather than lowering it down and make it more pushable for people lower on the ramp.
So I would disagree with that.
Please do.
My goal in life, well, I have many goals in my life. My goal in my
One of them being eating Pycross.
Yes, Picross, yeah. So my goal in my Drupal life is to stop this thing from happening. And the thing that happens is they're like, I need a website and I need to evaluate CMSs to see what I'm going to choose. They download WordPress, they download Drupal. In Drupal 8, for the first time ever, it will actually kind of look like WordPress, so they won't dismiss it immediately because they're like, there's no WYSIWYG.
Larry's talking about the
I know, but hear me out. So, you know, I want to stop this thing from happening where they try to perform the same task in 2 different systems, and this one makes absolutely no sense, so they ditch it. Use this other one that is less capable, get as far as they possibly can 3-4 years down the line, finally find something that they want to build that can't do, then get frustrated and be like, oh, I guess I have to go back to Drupal, God, you know, and then they go back to Drupal like, oh, this is amazing now that they know how it works. I'm going to use this for everything. If we could eliminate that 4-year gap to people finding out that Drupal's awesome and they can do it, that is what I want to achieve. And I agree that we don't want to dumb down the system and say, from now on, you just get Dreamweaver. You can only make pages. You know, we don't want to do that, but at the same time, I totally disagree. I agree that maybe to be a core developer, you're going to need a CS degree. You know, we're definitely moving in that direction. But I don't agree that that complexity needs to cascade all the way down. It's not like
I agree.
You need to have a CS degree to operate an accelerator on a car. You don't even need
I think
a
that
CS
was
degree.
actually
We're agreeing
Larry's
at this point.
Yes,
Yeah,
okay.
We want to make it usable for the users, but maybe
As well as the developers, though,
Yeah.
not
But I'm
core
saying,
developers.
and I think this is the point that Dries was making that I unfortunately agree with, that in order to make the Drupal that will short circuit that 4 years in WordPress purgatory. I'm sorry.
That's not offensive or isolating.
Sorry. In order to short circuit that 4 years in some other system that is less capable but has a better first 5 minutes experience, the barrier to entry to being core developer is going to go up.
Well, where
and I don't think
disagree
that's
with you
avoidable.
is I see them in layers. There's a core developer. But then they're like everybody else, and they're
People
developers.
who use it for work.
Yeah, they use it for work. They write little custom modules to do whatever. They do this kind of thing. There should not be a CS degree requirement to develop for Drupal. There should be a CS level. There shouldn't be one for developing Drupal itself, and I can see how that would be complex. We have to make sure we always keep the system as accessible as possible to users. And we have two
I don't
kinds
think
of
we've
users.
gone
We
too
have
far that
users
way.
and we have developers.
Yeah, I don't think we've gone too far either. I think as that complexity increases, right? I also unfortunately agree with Larry. That,
It's a terrible fate, I know.
Oh, you hate it when you agree with it.
that if
I hate it
that-
when I agree with me.
That if that learning ramp is higher, that our job, because we care, because we're Drupal, is to make sure that it's easier to get up that ramp. And I think we can totally do that. We can do that. We can help people get educated on the things that they need to know to work with this more complex system. And not only,
But we're not
it's
going to
not
get
just
around the fact
edu-
they have to understand classes and interfaces.
right.
Yeah.
We
But
could
that's
install
not-
a ramp. That would be nice, because right now they have to scale a cliff. So if we install a ramp, that would be a
Yeah, but I don't think it's just that we have to educate people, or at least tell them what they need to know. I think we're going to get some help in that area, because I think there are going to be tools available that make knowing what you need to know for this more complex system easier.
Yeah.
And I think those are already here, and I think they're just going to get better. So I think there is a higher complexity, and the ramp is higher, but it's not solely our preview to try and figure out how to get people up to that knowledge. I think the whole world has kind of sort of figured it out already. Like the new tools, new to me, tools to work with this more complex system make it easier to work on this more complex code than it was to work on the simpler system
That was very
with,
Drupal
with,
specific.
with not as many tools.
Are you
Right.
talking like
What about
PHP Storm versus Notepad, or in what context do you mean?
Yeah, that would be an example of the thing that I'm talking about, but I think there'll be tools that I don't even know what they are, that we're going to find in the next couple of years that are going to help people with this more complex system. Because we're smart, and when something is hard to do, we write tools to help us do them.
We have a couple of questions. So,
Well, so one thing I want to mention is that in a lot of cases right now, the user interface is kind of that bridge of understanding those concepts. And what we have is that there's such a humongous gap between, even if you have computer science background, you come to Drupal, you go like, what are all these terms and things that they throw at me? Because they're kind of a mismatch between computer science terms and things we think that are good for the like site builder end user. So we're trying to kind of mix these things. And I think that's also where we start building this kind of gap that becomes into this Drupal language, where it's not something that's usable for the site builder end user, but also not for someone who comes from a computer science background. So, yeah.
Jacob had a question.
Oh, I was just going to comment
No,
on
he's got food in his
now you're doing. So,
You're doing good.
all right, to your point on the at least my worldview, wherever it's at, in terms of where developers are going, I think that's correct. You know, in Jesus' keynote where he was going, hey, you take a Volkswagen, and it's really easy to hack on, and then it gets really, really complex. But I think the thing that even though he did mention that I don't want us to lose sight of, was even though it gets really complex and you go from like 100,000 mechanics who work on the car to like 1,000, you can never forget that, yeah, we lost like 90,000 roles or whatever my math was. We also opened up like twice as many roles and things that do like accessories and around things and frameworks. So like, as we move to Drupal 8, the front-end developers, my goodness, we just opened up like with a really nice web service, we just opened up a whole new class of people that can use it and extend it and make it better. You just don't need to be a core developer, right? And so we're opening up new, so I think we're going to see new roles. Like, I think the site builder role will start becoming more prominent. You don't need to be a core developer to build the site, but we still need site builders.
And
We're
once,
gonna need
once the
thousands of
software
them.
gets to a point where its usability is high enough that someone could be just the site builder and do a ton with it, then you open up a whole new set of possibilities for things that people could do with it.
Yeah. So your ecosystem is expanded, even though your developer role is diminished
Yep.
or concentrated.
Dree's been trying to kill the web developers since 2007 or something.
Yeah. We won't go easily.
Question?
maybe as a consequence of that.
Wait, can you say who you are?
Oh, I'm Mark. I'm a mobile freelancer. As a consequence of that, it's interesting. I learned PHP because Drupal did something I didn't understand. Are we? I mean, what would a world be like where Drupal didn't break for me?
Somebody please.
So more bugs.
So kill automated testing. All right.
That's part of why I love communities, because site builders can become developers. And maybe it's not the best way for that to happen, but it feels like it's. I feel like that's what a lot of the community
There's
is.
no risk of that happening.
I suppose that's true, yeah.
Isn't that like our job as developers, is to basically program ourselves out of a job?
Yes.
Write our code so well that it never breaks, and introduce a new job for us to do.
And you see how terrible we are at that job. That's all okay.
Wow.
There's something to that though. Like the first thing that really got me stuck in core was forums. Just made me angry. You know, yes, high five. You know what I mean? It was like, there was something and it was like, ooh, and then that's what caused me to get hooked, and now I'm here 10 years later, but you know what I mean? There is something to that, I believe that, yeah.
So can I make a real quick comment to that?
Sure.
So I think it's a really big risk because we've already seen it in our world. Like if you look at products where they're really easy to use, but complex to get into, right? Cameras, cars, whatever. And my point is, it's the community that enables that ability to go behind the scenes. And if you looked at, when I was like an ASP developer way back when I had hair, Microsoft was totally not open to letting you see behind the scenes. They're just like, if it doesn't work, well, then blah, 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 go get a CS degree, come work for us, and try to go through all these hurdles. Whereas the open source community was like, just look at the code. Got a question? Jump in that IRC. And you'll see that around like companies. Like if you're a camera user and working at a camera store, and you're a great photographer, but you want to get into the specifics, like Canon and Nikon have different cultures of those who can actually get behind the scenes. But technically they're the same. They're electronics shoved into a little plastic box. But if you look at their cultures of that ecosystem, radically different from who can build an ecosystem. So I think we do have a risk of, we can't lose our culture. We gotta keep embracing and say, yeah, it's really complex over on this side of the fence. Are you sure? All right, you do. Let's go. Like, embrace that. And then, anyway, so that's my comment.
I'm going to actually start wrapping us up on that too. I like that trend of thought though, the building tools that are so good that we open up a new possibility for the next generation of people building tools, and fostering a culture that allows for that too. But we've got to start wrapping things up. Tim?
Maybe we can get their questions on a hashtag, on the TC Drupal hashtag.
Sure.
We can think about them later at the party.
And wrapping things up means we'll start heading out. It doesn't mean the conversation
We have to vacate
has to
the
stop.
building.
Yeah.